but you don't know in your head what this image is going to look like and where you can leave things rough and where it's enough to just have like dots as tertiary shapes. And so like you start to make assets, and every asset you make as perfect as possible. You do every stone of the castle perfectly, and you sculpt everything by hand. And the character, yeah, he needs to have like custom model straps for his leg and stuff. If you start to like get into those things and not let them be just imperfect, then you're like in for some trouble. And that's like the kind of perfectionism where you need to learn to just let things be. And you can always polish later, but just learning that whatever you do doesn't have to be 100% perfect.
Please welcome concept artist Niklas Nebelsieck, who joins us for a fantastic episode where we cover topics like how to find your creative identity, whilst also coming to grips with your own mental health and finding a pathway that aligns with your strengths. Niklas is also a prolific Learn Squared student who has delivered some jaw-dropping homework to our gallery. So it's very interesting to hear how he discovered Learn Squared and what his journey was like before that. It's also important to note that in this episode we cover our own personal journeys and topics around mental health and what it is like getting diagnosed with ADHD. Please seek out medical advice from a professional if anything in this episode affects or resonates with you, and anything we say is based on our own experiences and is not medical advice. Just remember, what works for one doesn't work for another. Let's go. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Learn Squared podcast. I'm delighted to welcome on a special guest, Niklas Nebelsieck. Welcome, Niklas.
Hi, Aaron. Nice to talk to you today.
Thank you for jumping on. Looking forward to chatting. We've had a nice little chat before we've begun, so we've had to make sure we hit record just to save it for the episode. But before we get into the juicy stuff, I'm a big fan of your work. With my duties at Learn Squared, we've seen all the amazing work you posted just from taking our courses, and as a result, seeing the work you've produced just on your portfolio and everything in general. And it's been fun following you and just seeing just the awesome stuff that you create. But that's me, knowing what I know about you. If you wouldn't mind letting everybody know about who you are, what you do, and all of that good stuff.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Niklas. I'm a concept artist and a big fan of the Learn Squared podcast for a long time. So very happy to be here today. And yeah, I've been a Learn Squared student since I think 2020-ish, and learned a lot from taking the courses there. Yeah, I've worked in like as an entertainment designer since 2020.
Cool.
So like almost 3.5 years now. Yeah, I was an environment designer at Hyperbole for the last 3 years. Yeah, and just recently started doing some freelance work on the side, which has been like really exciting and challenging as well. And yeah, excited to see what's going to come up in the next couple of months.
Excellent. And that's interesting because I guess there's and realistically so because of what's happening, but there's like, I guess, a bit of a cloud over the industry for many different things, strikes, layoffs, AI, and all these kind of things as well. And you'd be forgiven for thinking that things are not exciting in the industry, yet you have the opposite, I guess, mindset. I'm not saying you don't feel anything negative about those particular things, but it's refreshing and interesting to hear of just your excitement for the career in general. But before we get into that kind of topic, 2020, is that when you started to work in entertainment design? Or is that when you started to learn it? Like, what was your journey leading you up to the events that kicked off 2020?
So I started working in 2020. Before that, I studied game art and animation from 2016 to 2018. And yeah, after that, had like quite a while where I was just in limbo, right? Because like I wanted to do concept art, and I knew that since I was like 13, 14, something like that.
Yeah.
Like I saw some videos from Ahmed Aldori, where he talked about concept art, and that
Mhm.
was like my first exposure to it. And like I saw the first video, and I knew that that's what I want to do. Like this is the job I want to do one day. And then found this school in Germany that offered to teach concept art, among other things. In hindsight, I didn't learn much concept art there. Like,
Interesting.
rough basics, but it was very broad. Like it taught you animation, 3D rigging, like game art, everything you need to make a game. So after that, like since the teamwork and the projects required us to make a game like with 3 or 4 people sometimes, there's just no space in the team for having a dedicated concept artist. So usually I did animation and was very passionate about that
Mm.
for a couple of years, and thought, okay, like this concept art stuff, it's too hard anyway, right? Because the bar is so high. I thought like
Mhm.
I'm never gonna get there. Yeah, and then after I was done studying, I worked in a small game studio where I did like mocap cleanup for I think 3 months roughly, which completely shattered my dreams of becoming an animator. Like it's just not for me. Like listening to the same voice line over and over and over again. Like,
Okay.
so
Okay.
seeing the same animation over and over again. And then yeah, like I was in 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 such a limbo for a while because I was like, okay, shit, I didn't learn concept art well enough.
Mhm.
I The thing I thought I wanted to do now, which was animation, is I don't want to do it. Like I can't do this every day. And then yeah, I saw this talk by Shadi Safadi, which was called "Concept Art is Dead." I don't know if you know it. Uh,
Yep.
but that kind of opened my eyes to, oh, maybe I don't really need to be a perfect painter to do
Yes.
concept art. Like I can do 3D. That's pretty cool. Um, which then, yeah, led me on the path of like looking up Blender tutorials, learning Blender, learning 3D. And yeah, from that, I learned with online tutorials. First like Gumroad, like the Jan Orschel tutorials, Jama stuff. And then at some point Learn Square popped up, and I got the first course. I think it was the Intro to Environment Painting by Mathieu.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, that led me where I am today. And in like 2020, I got the first job at Hyperbole, which is virtual production stuff, over some corners. And yeah, since then I've been working and constantly like doing stuff.
Cool.
Yeah.
Um, I've had like I guess a similar kind of at least sentiments to yourself in terms of like the journey that I had, like I guess the uni aspect and all that kind of stuff, and what I thought I could do post job wise doing that was similar in a sense. Like I was thinking, do I really want to be doing this? I want to be doing this thing, but I don't know how to get there. And then I kind of fell into this, and then it was like thinking like, am I going to be doing this or should I give it up? And I tried to give it up, and then similar to yourself, when I started learning stuff myself and finding tutorials and things like that online, um, that's when things really changed. I figured a lot of shit out and got to the path I wanted to get to. I'm curious to know what it was like for you at that time, though. Like, what was it about your journey as to why you were not breaking into concept art? Like, was it something that you were actively pursuing, or did you feel like everything just looked blocked and there was no possible way? What was your experience like?
Hmm. That's a good question, actually. Like, and I thought about this a lot over the years, and I think for me it was like pretty clear because everyone I asked for advice was like, okay, you got to specialize, get really good at one thing, and then like people don't need a Swiss Army knife with a couple of dull tools. Like they need one sharp knife that can do one thing very well. But like I'm not the person who can do the same thing every day. Like I get bored very quickly by things, and also I get inspired extremely quickly by stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
if I see like a trailer for a course that looks very exciting, and it's like, oh, new possibility to learn something, then I'm probably gonna do that and drop the thing I'm currently doing. if I'm not disciplined enough. And I got a lot better at that over the years. But especially during like 2019, early 2020, when I was like doing all these tutorials and courses, like online learning is a fantastic thing. Like it opens so many opportunities for you. And we live in a time now where you can learn whatever you want about this, but then you can learn whatever you want about this.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're like me, that's also a problem. If you don't have someone who sits you down and is like, hey, do this now. So like I was becoming this like jack of all trades kind of guy, and it it led to the point where it took me a lot longer to get to like general good level, but I also learned a lot of things, because like learning is the thing that makes me the happiest, I think. Like learning new things and learning about new things. So yeah, it took longer than if I just did one thing, but I think for me it was the right road.
Mm-hmm.
Because turns out the thing I learned things I learned along the way, which I thought was like, ah shit, I wasted some time again learning something that maybe doesn't help me. Turns out there's going to be some point in your life where you need that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been finding that out more and more. Like the animation stuff, for example, is like just helped me on a project where I had to do like a lot of character posing and key art stuff.
Yeah.
Which I haven't done. I shied away from it because I thought like, oh, I gotta be an environment artist only. So no characters.
Yes.
Like just photoscan characters. And then turns out like I'm very good at posing 3D characters and acting out stuff because I did animation for so long. So yeah, like the road you take leads you to where you are, and you have like experiences that only you have because you took that road.
That is very well said, and only because it's absolutely true. I can relate in that regard. And I took a very long road, and I don't think I even took the road. It was a lot of like side roads and not even the path, like literally through foresty areas that you're not supposed to go to. Somehow I went through there. Stupid of me, but I did. I think I learned a few things, like how to avoid certain areas that are like probably not safe or whatever. But it took me a while to acknowledge and to accept that there was value, at least in that, to be like, okay, that's the path I took. And yes, there's a bunch of stuff that was totally unrelated to concept art and entertainment design, yet I could not have gained elsewhere. Well, unless I was doing those different kind of things as well. How soon did you reach to that conclusion though? Because were you at a point where you were like full of regret or anything, or thinking, why did I even do this, or why did I pursue this? Did it beat you up? Did you beat yourself up at all, or were you quite confident throughout and thinking, okay, I know I'm not directly where I want to go. Well, I'm not directly at where I want to be at, but I know I'm heading that way. Was that the case for you? Or did you feel kind of like lost? And you did mention that you felt like a lot in limbo. And I guess some people in limbo, it's, I believe, at least in my interpretation, it's usually a wholly either negative experience or one where you're completely unaware that you're even in limbo, as opposed to anything positive about it. What was it like for you? Was it a negative experience for you?
It's a good question. Yeah, like for the longest time, it was a very negative experience because I didn't know why. Because it turned out like a couple of years ago, I got diagnosed with ADHD, which I didn't know until I was like 22, I think.
Right.
So like that explained a lot in hindsight.
Yes.
But then, yeah, this entire feeling of like other people are able to just pick something up and do it till the finish, be fine with what it is, and let it go. And for me, it always felt like this type of anxiety where every time I pick something up, I'm afraid that like I want to pick something else up, but then at some point I have so many things in my hands that it's like a kid collecting stones at the beach or like shells or something. And then they walk and they pick stuff up. And then at some points they have so much stuff in their hands that the next thing they pick up, they drop one thing again. And that's a bit what it felt like for me, like constantly picking up stuff. But every time I picked something up, I dropped something else.
Mm-hmm.
And because I didn't know why I was so inclined to be like that, I beat myself up for that a lot. Because I thought, like, I have to get there as quick as possible. That was like the first thing. Like, I thought I need to get there as quick as possible. And the other thing was, like, I was following these impulses, and every time I did, like, it led me to learn something new. But I thought, like, but I didn't finish this other thing. And
Mm-hmm.
if you start 5 projects and you never finish one of them, you have this thing in the back of your head where you're like, but I gotta finish this other before I start the next thing. And I think that caused, at least for me, caused a lot of anxiety and this feeling of never getting stuff done. And in the practical sense, it also led to my portfolio never like getting done more, even though I was working constantly. I didn't go to parties. I didn't like do stuff with friends. I just sat in my room for 12 hours a day, sometimes more, in front of my computer, doing personal work and never finished. And only quite recently, I think, I realized that that's fine. That's how I work. Like, stuff takes a long time for me to cook up.
Mm-hmm.
Like, especially personal work, because I keep overthinking it.
Mm.
Like with client work and at work, it's usually not a problem because there's like an art director and producers keep you on track, who provide the structure for you to function and give you some boundaries, give you deadline. So all things that, like, when they are there, I work extremely fast because I'm so used to like having to scramble it. And yeah, but now I've become more at peace with just having 20 things at once. I've learned to organize myself, to like, I use this program called Milanote, which is very good for visual planning. You can make like boards and mind maps and stuff. And I just keep all my projects there. So like, even if I pause them, I can just pick off right where I left. So I have this growing board of ideas and things I'm cultivating and projects I'm continually like bringing up and letting them rest for a while, doing something else, learning another skill, and then coming back with fresh eyes. And yeah, I haven't finished something personal work related in, I don't know, roughly a year or so, other than the like competition things. But I have so much stuff that quite soon, I think, I'm gonna finish, and then I'm gonna be happy with the result, I hope.
And would you say doing things that way now, would you say, I know you can never really eliminate it, it's always there, it just needs the right conditions to really flare up, but would you say almost the anxiety side of things, or at least to the point where it becomes problematic, has almost gone now you're doing things this way?
No, it's there still, but I've gotten good at realizing when it pops up. Because sometimes it sneaks in, right? It starts affecting your behavior, and it starts affecting how you treat yourself and how you view failures or how you view your problems. And then you don't let yourself rest. But you don't notice that it's happening. Or at least for me, I don't notice when it's happening. Not immediately. But especially like meditation and taking time out of my day away from screens and just being bored for like half an hour a day, just sitting somewhere and not doing anything. Like cultivating that usually leads to looking inward and realizing, okay, I'm feeling stressed right now. I feel like I should be taking a break right now. I got this urge to go back to work. Why is that? And then I look inwards and I'm like, okay, this is maybe because I don't feel like I deserve a break right now. And it's the anxiety again that is causing this. So yeah, like being more organized, but also learning to just like look at what's happening internally, for me helped a lot.
That's some powerful stuff. And like anxiety, and just like looking at it in a, obviously those people that experience it know exactly how debilitating and damaging it can be.
Mm.
Those who maybe never experienced it or not to that point where it's a problem will probably know somebody, whether they know it or not, is being affected by it. But it's something that, like, when you look at it in a mechanical sense, or like how it influences someone's mind and behaviors as if it were an ingredient or something, and then you can kind of like at least corner it, trap it, or let the energy dissipate into a way where it's not as destructive. Like, it's something that you have to kind of learn how to handle and manage. Like, it's not something that you can eradicate. I don't think it's even meant to be eradicated. It's just, I think, for some minds, it's an overdrive versus, say, a regular mind. But it's encouraging to hear. I've also had a friend recently, and people of my generation, it's like things like ADHD and anything that's like that kind of stuff was ever spoken about until at least when we were in our 30s. And I had a great conversation with him. I won't mention him to protect his privacy. But he's explaining, and you'd never guess it to speaking to him, but he got recently diagnosed with ADHD. And I remember early on when I used to know him, he used to speak a lot about he would just crash and burn through anxiety. Like, you think of him like, well, you think to yourself, but you wouldn't expect someone like you to have to worry about that with the line of work they had and the things they did. But obviously, you educate yourself even more to like, no, that's not how anxiety works, and that just means that person was doing a doubly hard job to not let it consume them, or at least not, like I mentioned before, let that anxiety thing dissipate. By the way, I'm not a medical professional, so please ignore my definitions or anything. But nevertheless, just hearing him talk about his journey in that regard and the things you mentioned there is so like copy and paste in terms of the things that he experienced as well. Like with the fixations, trying to get things sorted out, how that can affect you if it's not getting sorted out, if the resolution that you're looking for doesn't come, how it can almost eat you up. But then him getting diagnosed and then finding, at least just seeing that like as almost like, oh, that's what my reflection looks like. And the mirror he was looking at before was not telling the truth, or he couldn't see it, was one of the biggest things that ever happened to him. And then obviously decoding things, scaling things back, realizing, oh, that's what happens to me when I'm in this situation, or that's what this means. And it's quite interesting because we was having a conversation like we are now, but he was explaining, but at this same point in time, I'm paying attention to that person's conversation, what they're doing over there, just to try to give an example of how ADHD works. Yeah. What was it like getting diagnosed, and what led you to get diagnosed?
So yeah, I was doing therapy, and then like I kept ranting about stuff. I remember the specific thing where like I came out of the grocery store and like I crossed the road, which was a day where I was like very scatterbrained. So I was stressed because I was coming out of a very full, loud grocery store, which is like very overstimulating for me. And then I came out and I looked at my keys for some reason. And I crossed the road while counting my keys for some reason. Like my mind jumped to, oh, this key is looking interesting. And I almost got hit by a car.
Wow.
And then I mentioned that in therapy, and my therapist it's like, you know, you have ADHD, right? I was like, no? What? He's like, oh yeah, like all the things you mentioned, like it fits perfectly. You should try to get diagnosed. And then I did, got a diagnosis. But for me, it changed things only in a way where I was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Before that, I was always like, shit, why is this not working? And yeah, like after that, I was like, oh, okay, this makes sense. And it helped like with not beating myself up. But what helped even more is that there's a recipe for how to fix these things. Because a lot of people have that problem. And there are solutions. And you can learn these solutions. And like whether it's medication or learning things like organization, like apparently learning organizational skills are similarly effective as medication. And just learning these organizational skills like helps so much with just catching a lot of the things that you usually drop, and having like systems in place that make you feel safe and not like alert the entire time. Because usually I would always feel like I'm dropping something somewhere, but I don't know what it is, but it's really important. Like I'm probably forgetting something there, and probably there's something I'm forgetting here, and probably right now there's an appointment that I forgot. Right? This thing of always feeling like I'm forgetting something. That's like something that breeds anxiety. And if you have systems in place that help you with like systems that you can trust, they may fail, maybe, but then it happens. It's okay. But you can trust them, and you know, I got everything. And if I feel like I forgot something, I just look at the thing and it tells me what I need to do. And that's very, very helpful. And I feel the same way it is with like planning your project and having a place where you put your project. So, something like Milanode or like other organizational programs, just where you can look at and see what you've been doing, and have that visually somewhere, not just like a folder structure where you have like all your scattered files of your Blender files or your PSDs, but somewhere where you can like visually look at it and see all the projects you're working at right now. And then you don't feel like you forget a project. So yeah, I think that helps with anxiety and this feeling of forgetting things.
And forgive me for dwelling on this topic too much. I just find it super fascinating, and I also think it's a lot of people are dealing with this kind of stuff, and they don't even realize it's that specific thing they're dealing with, or maybe it's not, but it's kind of close to wherever it might be. Because I think anything when it's like creative related, because we're putting so much of ourselves into it, you naturally get self-conscious, and that can breed, like you said, anxiety or other kind of things. And then it can eat you up and whatever else. Like what kind of things, if you could speak to your younger self that was going through this, what would you give them? Like, what would you advise them to do? Like, say, hey, just keep an eye on this, because also yourself in general, and maybe sometimes you can all be a bit stubborn, and maybe someone told you that answer back then, but you completely ignored it because you were completely fixated on how you need to do things. And I guess it's kind of like maybe a rhetorical question, because on one hand you can say, well, if I gave that person the cheat codes, how you are today would not exist. You'd be somebody else.
Yeah.
And maybe that might be worse or better. Who knows? It's one of those like weird time travel things. But entertain me. Let's assume that you could do that. What would you say to the younger self that was really, or the points where you think, okay, that's when I really needed some help, or that's the moment I identify where I was like, that was a tough time for me, or just somewhere where like, if I had just nailed that one specific thing or figured that one thing out, then it would have been amazing.
That's such a tough question. It's a very good one, but a very tough one as well. Because I think, like, as you mentioned, if I had the cheat codes, then I wouldn't have had to make the experiences that I did. And making those experiences only led me to learn the things that I learned, right? So, like, yeah, of course, things like getting diagnosed earlier, or like cutting out some of the struggle in some places may have led me to get where I am faster, or like not struggle as much in certain places. But then I think having taken so many detours along the way taught me a lot. And having failed so often at things also taught me a lot. So, like, maybe I would tell myself, like, take it easy. Like, don't beat yourself up that much. Like, sit down, put down your phone, like, don't spend as much time on social media, because you're never gonna get that back. Maybe that. But, like, yeah, I would tell myself, take it slow. Like, take your time, do the things you enjoy, not the things that you think that other people want to see or the industry wants to see. Because guess what? In a couple of years, there's going to be AI and it's going to be better than you anyway. So like, might as well just do the things you enjoy. And yeah, take it slow. Take your time. Don't rush things. Don't try to finish things the quickest you can. Like, yeah, getting your speed up is required and nice, but there's this quote that I don't know who said it. I heard recently, which is slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And I think that, like, the more you think about it, the more it clicks with me, at least. Because especially when it comes to workflow and being more efficient, being faster, like doing your art faster. Like, the more you try to make it faster, the more you struggle, and people can see that struggle in your image. But if you do things a lot, and if you have a lot of like routine, then things are effortless. And people like to see things that are effortless, because usually they are good. So making a decision and not going over it again and again, but just letting it be bad if it's bad, and say, okay, that was a bad one. Let that go. Do the next one. Like, if you look at designers like Aurora Machina, like Andre, maybe you know.
Yes.
Like, he's an absolute master of that. Like, he does things once. Like, at least it looks like that in his videos, but he's very efficient. Like, he got his workflow down. And he knows that every decision he makes will stay there. He puts something somewhere, and then he leaves it there, because he knows it's a good decision. And learning to do that, like learning to just make a mark and leave it, I think is becoming more and more satisfying. Like, sticking with the decision. To come back to the question, like, I would tell myself to learn that.
I think that is perfect, and it's very wise as well. Because it's so easy to say, almost tell someone a cheat code, like, well, first of all, invest in this because that's going to go to this, and then all that kind of stuff, and all these superficial things, as opposed to just like show someone the course, almost like you just said, like, hey, this is the path you just got to follow, stick with it, trust it, go with it, struggle with it, but just don't stop, kind of thing. And I think that's powerful. It definitely is, but it's also humbling as well, because it shows you don't necessarily need, and I'm a strong believer of this, like, you don't need all these extra things or these big, although they're nice when they happen, like, you know, these big, I guess, flashes of luck or whatever that can really like change everything. It's like, if you stay consistent, and that consistency really breeds good things for you, or in at least, even if it's like a minuscule amount, as long as it gives some kind of positive output, you gotta never let that go if possible, because that's gonna help you so much. You mentioned before, like, about speed, and obviously your relationship with like just trying to, and I can relate to this. I remember when I was at uni, like, all of my final projects for any particular coursework were absolutely trash, purely because I never believed in anything I wanted to submit. So up to the last minute, I was always trying to figure it out, trying to work it out. I had probably always the most, and I say this with confidence, and also with shame as well, always the most output of work. Like, hours put back then, it wasn't digital, it was all like paper. So my papers was like this thick of marker paper with all sketches and designs and all that. It was an absolute mess, unorganized. And I look back and now, like, if I was assessing that, I would not look for every single sheet. But for me, that's all I could show, because I was like, okay, I didn't realize what I wanted to realize, but look, I did so much work. Does that count for something? Kind of thing. That's what I was trying to do. But yeah, it was the same kind of thing. Like, I was just trying to power through something. And rather than, like, if I don't know if you're into like racing or Formula One or anything, I was more concerned about trying to make the engine go faster rather than figure out the aerodynamics and maybe just get quicker that way and improve the handling, and so to speak. But I was like, I realized now what I was chasing and I was doing it the wrong way. What were you chasing at that point in time? Like you mentioned speed.
Mhm.
Was it speed? And if so, why speed? Like why that particular trait? Or was it something else you were chasing?
Hmm. I think, I think I wanted to be fast in what I do, but I'm always such a perfectionist, and in a bad way, perfection.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, like it's good to want to make things as good as they can be, but if you get stuck on not letting things be imperfect, then like, you don't progress. And this camera is getting really
And
bright
I,
right now.
you're good. You're good. You're good. You're good.
If you like get stuck on not letting things be a bit imperfect, then you can get into the cycle of like polishing every detail along the way. And especially if you don't know where you're gonna end up in what you're making, then like say you want to make an image and you know it's gonna have like a landscape and a foreground character and also like a castle. But you don't know in your head what this image is going to look like and where you can leave things rough and where it's enough to just have like dots as tertiary shapes. And so like you start to make assets and every asset you make as perfect as possible. You do every stone of the castle perfectly and you sculpt everything by hand. And the character, yeah, he needs to have like custom model straps for his leg and stuff. If you start to like get into those things and not let them be just imperfect, then you're like in for some trouble. And that's like the kind of perfectionism where you need to learn to just let things be.
Mm-hmm.
And you can always polish later, but just learning that whatever you do doesn't have to be 100% perfect. People are fine usually with looking at stuff that doesn't look like the best detail in the world, as long as like the overall thing is good. And focusing more on the overall thing. What's the idea? Like, where do I want this image to go? Where do I want this project to go? What do I want to communicate with? Can I reduce the idea of a project down to like one sentence? Does it still hold up then? Those are like the important things to be perfectionist about. Like taking things away until you cannot take something away. And if it still works then it might be a good image. Like that's the kind of perfectionism that it's worth investing in.
Mm-hmm.
Letting yourself go down that path, rethinking ideas. But this polishing stuff before it's even going somewhere is dangerous. And I've only learned that the hard way.
What are you hunting now?
Hmm. Good question. I think I'm hunting for this ability to make a mark once and then leave it there. Because there's such a beauty in just putting, like, be it in 3D or in 2D or whatever, like in painting, in making assets and in making blockouts, making scenes. But there's such a beauty in just making a decision and just let it be there and then make the next one and see if that's good and make the next one. And then you come to a point where you see the entire image very quickly. And if it failed, then you failed very early at least.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can do another one. And if you do it the same way, then I don't know. There's such a beauty in just letting failures be there and
Mm-hmm.
throwing them away if it's bad. But making marks once and be fine with what it is. Like trusting the process and enjoying the process more than the outcome.
And has that been always there for you as far looking back now, or is that something that you've concluded recently?
Like I've concluded that quite recently, but
Mhm.
I mean, it took a long time, and I definitely am not at the end of that road. Like I think I'm still at the beginning of learning that. Having to learn that even it took a long time, and I think I've made that discovery about 20 times in my life already. and then forgotten it again.
Yes.
Because I focused on something else again, and then, I don't know. Like, you learn something and then you think you know everything, and then you get to a point where you've learned enough to know that you know nothing. And then you think you know nothing again, right? So it's always this, I think it's called Dunning-Kruger effect, where you
I believe so. Yeah.
where you know where you learn something and then you think you know everything, and then you learn you know nothing. There are people who are so much better than you. And I don't know. I've just become comfortable with being there and having this like beginner mindset, and being fine with not being perfect at something, but just making a choice and see what outcome it has. I think that's like trusting that the world will provide an interesting outcome for what you did, whether it be artwork or anything else in life. Just making a choice and sticking with it and seeing what happens afterwards is very liberating.
Yes, that is truly powerful. I believe that, and that's an epiphany that has come to me quite recently as well. Or one, I guess I could say, is I've latched onto and decided to commit to it rather than like say I've realized it, because there've been times in the past where I've completely tried to adopt something else with the assumption that that's where I need to head towards, and etc. But then I always believe that whatever your true calling is, that's how you want to describe it, or whatever your actual groove is, probably a better way to describe it. Like, you always end up fitting into that thing anyway, and you'll end up back there whether you like it or not, whether you choose to accept it or not. Your groove is your groove. But yeah, like almost just like paying attention to it and listening to it, and then committing to it, kind of thing, and then just seeing where that goes. Like that's quite powerful. You're humbling, sometimes humiliating as well, because you realize that you're never going to achieve the things that you probably expect yourself to achieve, which is probably more accurate than saying things you think you'll achieve or should achieve. Because like you said, when you get to a position, you always think, no, you're always a beginner. And if you think about it truly, like, how much can one really understand and know in life? No matter how much they achieve, and there's some fantastic people throughout history and will continue to be, who will achieve exceptional things that we can't even imagine, will still be very close to 0% in terms of mission complete for life and the universe in general. That's like quite profound. But at the same time, it's, yeah, like I agree with you that that's something I found peace in, and something to really like look at, and in a weird way, because there's some similar things that maybe I need to get diagnosed too, perhaps. But with things you mentioned about like just being in busy and public places and the overload of things, I struggle with that. Also, when you mentioned about working with projects, especially when it's with clients, I'm fine in a structural situation. I'm fine when parameters are set, so I can just run in, do the heist, do what we got to do, and that's it. Yet when it comes to personal stuff, because I've got to set the parameters, it's a bit more of a different issue.
But you are so consistent though with your personal work. At least it looks like that from the outside. But I'm kind of jealous of that. Like you are so you have such a recognizable type of work. Like I love it.
Oh, thank you. That shows that the illusion has definitely worked for sure. Because that's definitely not my true output. And with my life, I guess the last 4 or 5 years or so, output has been very difficult to come by. So this is just me on autopilot and getting things out there whilst I try and get control of the spaceship or the aircraft again, and try and get back on track, because I'm running out of fuel or whatever. But no, I appreciate that. Thank you for the kind words. But if you really knew what went on behind the scenes and what went on in my head, you definitely know that it's more not the case. As in, like, there's not much in control or deliberate in that sense. But it's, I guess, an attempt of me just trying to like do something whilst I'm heading towards the thing I really want to do. Does that make sense? I definitely have been in situations where I have completely stopped altogether. And for me, that was a mistake, at least in terms of me as a person, me as what makes me tick and what makes me, I guess, the best version of myself. So knowing that I'm never going to do that again, if possible, I always try and make sure I do something, even if it's nothing, if that makes sense.
Mm,
But also,
it
when I
does.
did stop, getting back into momentum again, it was very hard trying to restart the engine,
Mm,
get momentum, whilst, at least in the industry perspective, how things quickly move,
mm,
your skills just like go out of focus.
yeah.
And then to get them back in, then all of a sudden you're dealing with Terminators and AI robots and stuff, and you got to
Yeah.
outdo those if that's how you look at things.
I know exactly
Um,
what you mean. Yeah.
so yeah, knowing that if I have to do that again and restart the engine again, and the older I am, the less patience I have, and
Mm,
whatever else is like, I don't want to do that again. And my dad and my brother, they are active runners. Like they run daily, weekly. They're very in shape, very opposite to me. And there's something my brother said, which was like, even if he doesn't want to, he'll always make sure he does his 5K run a week because he knows what it's like when you fall off the wagon to get it back on. It's easy to not do it, and then you go out of shape.
mm,
So ever since there's a case of like, if it's small amount, 1% of what I want to do, I'd rather do that than not at all. Only because I have decoded that of myself, and I know that's a formula that works for me.
mm.
But I've also know people who it's important to completely switch off, turn everything off, remove themselves far away from what they're doing, go away, come back however many years later, get back into it again, and it works for them. And I think it's I'll stop the ramble now. But I think it's just fascinating how like different formulas work for different people, and equally seeing maybe someone else's formula who, like my brothers, for example, like I'll never be like him in that regard, but just seeing how that affects him has influenced me positively.
Yeah.
Even though I'll never be able to adapt that formula kind of thing, and I do that with athletes and other types of professionals in different industries who I deem high level, just to see how what makes them tick, what makes them not give up, and I try and like just steal bits and pieces into that.
Yeah. I mean, looking at people who do stuff like extreme sports or um, like extreme athletes, and then trying to adapt that to art, I think is very interesting. And I've done similar things because, I mean, at least professional art, in a way, um, can be viewed in some sense as extreme sports, right? Or like at least competitive sports, because it's such
Mm-hmm.
a competitive field. Like lots of people run, lots of people do art, but only a few do it professionally. And like getting the right habits and knowing that these habits will like get you where you need to go, I think is very liberating in the sense. Because what you said about like taking a break or not taking a break because you're afraid that at some point you will have to start again. And for me, at least, sometimes it's when I've had a period of very intense work or like a very inspired period where I did a lot of work and I kind of like let my resource deplete a bit too much. And then my body takes that break that it needs. Then I always have this thing where I kind of dread starting again because the last memory I have of working is being burnt out.
Mm-hmm.
And then I always go through this phase of being scared that my mojo is gone, right?
Yes.
That, oh no, I've destroyed it. I've destroyed my creativity. It's gone. It's never gonna come back. But so far it hasn't. Like, or so far I haven't destroyed it.
Mm-hmm.
I can trust that it's always gonna come back. Because I think, and that's like a big topic, but like what makes us creatives? What makes us what causes us to be this crazy about something? And I think for me, what it comes down to is curiosity about things. I think the thing that makes me a creative is, I don't know, not necessarily this thing of needing to create things, but quite opposite. Like, I am such a curious person by nature. I'm so interested in things and learning about things that
Mm-hmm.
art is basically for me just the way to digest that. And my way to make sense of all the things that I see. I go through, for example, I was in Sicily in October, and just walking through such a new place, because I've never been there before, was so overwhelming. Like every day I just fell down into bed at like 10 because there's so many things that I saw and so many buildings that I saw, and the way the light fell into the streets totally looked different than here. And all of that was so beautiful. I was able to see like the beauty in every single little thing because it was so new to me. And I think like the way looking at these things influences me is what makes me creative. Because I need to put them down somewhere and digest them and tell the world about how I saw them. And that will never go away. If I'm burned out or not, the way I look at the world, it will never go away. And the way I learn about things will also never go away. That curiosity, it is there whether I want to or not. And I think that way it's for most creatives. It will stay there, and I think you can trust that it will stay there. And at some point, you will have the energy and you will have the time to work, and then you will not be able to not pick up a pen. You will not be able not to work, because that itch will be so bad that you have to scratch it. And just trusting that that happens, I think, yeah.
Yeah, no,
You can trust that.
I totally agree. And I think it's more down to people being aware of it or not. But I don't think I've yet to meet a creative, at least one that I've asked, where that whole side or that aspect of creativity, because we always assume it's like through the hand and whatever the page is or whatever the canvas is and whatever, how it ends up, where the energy ends up into that particular thing. That's the art or the creativity side of it. Now, it's always in here. It's always swimming in here first. That's always on. Like if you have not access to a pen or anything, or you have nowhere to create, like you just said, just walking through a street, your brain is still making those links, picking those reference things, or just even anything else. I think it's more the other way around. Like the brain is configured in a particular way, and it can't help but be agitated by all this stimulus, and it just has to manifest in any particular way. And with anything, if you don't manifest in any particular way, it's going to come out in a particular way. Or, as you said, and I get this too, where it's a case of like, if I have a day where a lot happens, and it might be like nothing, just like walking through stuff. And I realized this recently as well. Like if I used to work in a busy place, like if I walked through there, I didn't realize how much it took out of me mentally, just noise and people and lights and all that kind of stuff, all the sensory stuff, right? I didn't realize how much it takes out of me, but it's a mechanical thing. The brain's a mechanical thing. If it processes in that way, it makes sense, right? Nothing like, I guess, magical about it. But I think like in a creative way, maybe that's going to be something that's also diagnosable as well, like whether someone's a creative or not. Because right now we only judge it on.
You have a bad case of creative.
Yeah, there you go. Because right now we judge it on like what they can create and base it off that, as opposed to how the mind works in general. But yeah, my current, again, not a scientist or anything, but my current thesis is that it's more the way your brain is configured, as opposed to, and obviously then how you execute it. That's when you nurture your skill. There's definitely an element of that. Again, back to athletes, like why are some, and I think looking at athletes is great because there's a lot of information on them about how this particular elite type of human operates versus maybe in other industries, like maybe medical industries or even the science industry, anything else, because we don't really, there's not much things recorded in terms of like how these people are speaking, how they act, how they live their day, versus all the information put into them and the work they do just to perform for like anything between an hour or even a few seconds, just to deliver. So you get to see how they work. And yes, there's some people who are naturally gifted, and that's more so because maybe their brain just makes those connections quicker to the muscles, to the bodies, or whatever else. That's great. But there's always that also other element of like training themselves to also be elite and then the other side of the mental side, which is maintaining it. And there's definitely a more eloquent way to articulate than I just did.
I think it's bite.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that word translates perfectly to English, but in German we have this word for bite, biss, but it also means that you latch onto something and you don't let go.
Yes.
And I think that's like the one quality that distinguishes like top athletes from, or like people who achieve mastery in something from anyone else, is that they just don't let go.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yes.
they keep coming back, and they have that extra energy and that extra willpower or motivation, whatever you want to call it, to even try to achieve mastery in something.
Mm.
Because you're never going to achieve mastery, but you can try. That's the
Yes.
only thing you can do. You can only try to achieve mastery. And if you think about it really, like it's such a crazy thing to try to do. Dedicate so much time just to learn that one thing and become very, very good at running fast
Yes.
or riding a bike very fast or become good at art. Yeah, and it takes like a certain obsession or being a nerd about something
Mm-hmm.
in such a bad way that you can't not do it. And I think that's what distinguishes people like that from other people.
And it can, and then at the same time, I've also noticed as well, not in all cases, because again, you don't know really truly somebody, especially when there's cameras on them or whatever. Like you really have to speak to them in a private setting to really understand what, and know them for a while to really understand what they're about. But also, and as we've spoken about our own art journeys, it's like this cool thing that we're pursuing. Yes, there's definitely, I don't think happiness is the right word to use it, but it's more on the positive side. Like there's definitely
Mm.
satisfaction gained from pursuing it, especially when you nail something that you want to nail, or you end up with something that you didn't expect and you're still happy with it. Like there's just that exploration side of thing. But it can get quite dark, and it can turn you into a not nice person as well.
Mm.
And that's something that I've experienced only through it being highlighted to me.
Mm.
And if it wasn't highlighted, I was in complete delusion. I thought, this is not affecting me at all. I'm totally fine. Like, how it's not possible, and you kind of need that recognition. And I see it in like high level people as well. Like you see these traits, and I've worked in sales. So I've spoke to a lot of different type of personalities, and I'm not an expert, but I've definitely got like a sixth sense for a type of personality that I'm interacting with. Yeah, so it's interesting how also that can really mutate somebody and mutate their personality into a good way or a bad way. Mainly it's for them to just achieve what they want to achieve, which is great for that particular point in time. But then maybe it's a lifetime of misery because you can't do that again. Then you've destroyed relationships, or you're not a compatible person to other people, which is quite sad when you think about it, but it's not a case for everybody. But yeah, it's just interesting that.
Think about
Yeah.
difference. Like now that you say it, maybe it's not maybe that's a distinguishing factor between people who break or become toxic or hateful towards themselves and others and people who are at peace. Maybe the thing is that people who are so focused on the outcome, they will hate when that outcome doesn't happen. And since mastery is an unachievable outcome, they will hate themselves. And people who are just liking the process and liking the process of learning, usually I find that they are more at peace and more okay with not being perfect and nicer to others
Yes.
who are better than they are. That's often the thing with people who are perfectionists, right? They hate seeing people who are better than themselves because, and that's true for me as well. Like if you are confronted with someone who is so much better than you are, you feel less, right? But if
Does
you,
that get to you a lot? Because obviously, I think we all experience that. Like when we see something that's just like wow, like you're just like wow, like you just think how much it seems unfathomable. You do get that kind of feeling of like shit, like why am I even bothering? But then for me, it doesn't last long, and then the awe overrides that side more, and it's like wow, how did this happen? And then it becomes either a source of inspiration or just like Nice. Well done. A round of applause. I got my own thing going on. What? How does that affect you?
I think oddly enough, AI and this entire thing totally changed my outlook on this type of stuff.
Right.
I think before AI, if I saw people who are so unfathomably good at what they do, or they produce such amazing work that I couldn't even begin to understand what it is that is so good about that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it scared me, I think. So I don't know what, like, probably it was like I shied away from it. And looking into myself now, maybe there was something of avoiding, or my ego trying to avoid looking at these things in order not to feel less.
Mm-hmm.
And oddly enough,
Mm.
AI has totally changed that. Since AI has come along, it is the norm that there is something now that can make near technically perfect images. Like they may not have like best composition and like all the things that are weird about AI work, but if you want to admit it or not, there are images made by AI, generated by AI that you you and I and most people will never be able to like make in a reasonable amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
So this competition aspect became less for me. I'm totally fine with where I am now because perfection is not the thing I want to achieve anymore.
Yes.
The perfection is not what will make me a great artist, but what I have to say is what's unique to me
Mm.
and unique to you and all the other human artists. We have something to say that no one else does.
Mm.
And finding what that is for me has become much more fulfilling. And also like seeing what that is in other people, seeing human artists and instead of being jealous of how good they are, like just rejoicing in the fact that, wow, this was made by a human who had something to say. It's so much more beautiful than the way I looked at it before.
I'm afraid to ask this question purely because I think maybe it shouldn't be asked. Like, let it manifest. But the story that you want to tell, or the story that you want to hunt for,
Mm.
or whatever it is you want to, like, I guess, nurture and realize. You don't have to answer this as well if you want to keep it more personal.
Mm.
But what is that?
Mm.
Do you know yet, or do you kind of know?
Well, like I discover something new I want to, or I have to say every day, right? And I wish I knew the end answer to that, but I think the closest I got to finding a solution to that problem was like the image I made for the Concept 101 thing. And I mean, that was an interesting, or that image is very meaningful to me for many reasons, but for me, it was like oddly enough, one of the most effortless images I've ever made.
Mm-hmm.
Because like before that, I participated in the Atom Hawk competition, which was a struggle because that image had so many ideas layered on top of each other. Like I wasn't just fine with just making a spa and like it's this image with all these aliens and it's an alien spa and there's heat lamps and those are like the strange suns. So too many ideas. And it took so much effort just to get these ideas into one image. And it didn't turn out very good in my opinion because it's too many ideas. So after that, I was kind of burned out and was like, okay, I'm not going to do the 101 thing as well. It's like, I need a
Mm-hmm.
break. And then I saw this very cool image by the Oscar. And I was like, okay, shit, I think I want to participate as well. It's a very cool prompt, so maybe. So I had a very convoluted idea, which had the same problems as the 101, the Atom Hawk thing. And I ran into the same thing where it's like, as I kept working on it, one more idea because the thing before wasn't enough, right? This feeling of the idea not being special enough and people won't like it if it's like the best idea they've ever seen. Right? So the idea itself got more complicated the longer I kept working on it. And I spent like a month on the image and in the end, I hated it. So like I kept calling my friend Max, and like I showed him the image before that a couple of times, and he was like, I don't know, like maybe you need to ingest more story. And so yeah, a week before the deadline, I called him and I was like, man, I hate this image. I don't even want to hand it in. Like, I'm not gonna do it. And he was like, maybe you just start from scratch. Maybe you just throw it away, sit down and like write down sentences until you have one that clicks immediately. So I did. And that took me like 2 or 3 days. Just thinking about this and trying to find an idea that works in one sentence where not one word can be taken away. And that was like such a valuable lesson. Just learning this thing that maybe adding things is not the way to go. Maybe taking things away until nothing can be taken away. That's like where the gold is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I did for that image. And the idea was just like, what did it feel like to have ADHD in school? Who's this emissary? Well, maybe he's like the emissary of my imagination. Like when I sat in class, I couldn't concentrate. I was looking out of the window and imagining stuff happening. So I got down to like something that I can relate to, something that lives very deep within me. And because I knew that what I wanted to show so well, it was basically effortless. Like it took me, I think, 6 days maybe to make that image. As to oppose the thing that I've worked on for a month before that, which was a struggle.
Yes.
So learning to find these things that will cause this in me. That's what makes art meaningful to me. Yeah, and it's not about necessarily what I want to say, but finding these things that I can say this way.
That's epic. Goal. Like that's definitely going to be one of my. I always have like throughout doing the podcast. There's always like little tales, little stories that people have said that just stick with you. This is definitely going to be one of them. Because it's purely honest. Like you definitely, like it's just you. Firstly, were you at the event when they dished out the awards?
Yeah.
Or were you not?
Yeah.
It's a shame because we were there. It would have been nice to speak in person.
I think I ran across you, but the entire evening is such a blur.
Yeah, no, fair enough. But next time, we'll definitely make sure to take out time. Also, I mean, like when you're looking at it, it makes sense. Yes, like maybe from a craft point of view, like one thing that you kept throwing energy at wasn't working, which is something that you've experienced before. And then almost seemingly, when you put less energy into it, if you want to look at it that way, although maybe that's not an accurate way to describe it, it worked. But then if you also look at it, it was a topic, something that you have multiple 1,000 hours of experience of internally. Yeah. So therefore, if you were to ever describe that either in words or however else you wanted to, you would know how to let that come across, because that's something that picture's been in your head for like forever. So logically, that's like makes sense. Like it's a perfect cheat code. Like if you really, and you hear this with script writers, composers, and things like that. Like the ones that I've seen, the ones that really get my attention, because you're always like, especially, I'm always fascinated by disciplines that I'm never ever probably ever going to go into, but just seeing how they do things, why did they make that decision, and what are the crossovers. Hearing how they speak is quite interesting, but then there's always this common thread, and one of them is like, I'm trying to imbue this emotion. Never speaking about I'm going to use F major chord and align it with this, or I'm going to use, like in cooking, for example, I'm just going to add a bit of like a tablespoon, 5 milligrams of chili. That's going to solve it. No, they're always speaking abstract, speaking emotion, because they're trying to evoke something, and you can't evoke something you've never experienced. You can ape it like AI does, for example. But you can never really put it in there unless you have to experience it. Yeah. So yeah, in that sense, it makes complete sense why that strategy would work. But I also get it because I've had similar experiences in the creative aspect of, like, not to discredit your stuff, but at least from my angle, like throwing shit at the wall and it never sticks. It just always slides down and leaves a mess and I have to clean it afterwards. Yeah. Versus if I just stop and start again and it works. But there's always the anxiety of like, but if I have to start again, I might not finish it, and then let's
Mm.
just try and finish this up. And I guess that's a metaphor for a lot of things in life. Why things were a mess, perhaps in certain things, we just maybe have to, just stop throwing shit at the walls. But um, with that said, like, have you changed your approach to projects then since that? Has that
Mm.
really made an epiphany and be like, okay, I'm more going to focus on this strategy? Or is it just one of those things where, like, okay, this is a new skill set, or this is a method that I'll deploy when the project is a fit for it? That makes sense.
Mm. Well, I mean, yes and no. Definitely what stuck with me and the lesson I felt like I had to learn there was this less is more thing. And I mean, you hear that always. People keep saying this, like, even if you're young, people say like, oh, less is more sometimes. But that's what it took for me to learn that lesson. And there's more to learn from that lesson for sure. But yeah, I mean, this maybe sometimes take away things and just not have as much, but have one thing that works. That's what I learned from that. But other than that, I think this idea with just starting with a sentence and taking words away is definitely a method I will employ more. And if I have to troubleshoot things in an image, I will not look into what can I add until it works, but what can I take away? Does it work then? And other than that, I have different projects running that have different types of approaching it. Like I have some world building things that I just throw stuff into whenever I feel like it.
Mm-hmm.
I have some projects that are more like just making images for like set story. For example, I'm doing this Don Quixote project thing where I've been just reading the book and I have images in my head that I want to just make images out of, so I don't have to think as much about what this is going to be. So it's clear what it's going to be. And that's quite enjoyable. And other than that, I kind of just keep waiting for the next time I will have this kind of idea. And I'm fine with not having it right now. It's personal work. For professional work, other people have the great ideas. It's fine.
I like that because I'm doing the same thing. It's like I've realized that I'm at least more so now, I'm more of a waiter of the idea as opposed to a chaser of the idea. And yeah, like I haven't got a harpoon to catch the idea. I've just got a net. And then when I catch it, then we'll go down, make it work, and then I'll just catch it again. I'm cool with that. Because I've tried the chasing thing and it's cool. Like I don't mind it. Like I don't hate either one, but I think that's the kind of at least the stage I'm in right now. Maybe it suits my lifestyle or whatever. But you as a creative, before we spoke about just like where you're from, for example, and you mentioned that, and you spoke about it in the podcast as well, like how your environment clearly is a massive influence on you, whether you like it or not. I'd love to hear more about that. Like, how is the creative space around you, whether it's the four walls around you or the grass outside of those four walls? How did you realize that is something that you need to cultivate and curate?
So I think a good example is my PC broke recently, like just when the new year started, and then I realized like, oh goddamn, I'm so screwed when this thing breaks that I need to work.
Yes.
And I mean, it's kind of a metaphor because like often we forget that this body and also this mind that's in here is like the tools we need the most. And like learning to cultivate these and keep these running smoothly as possible is something that I've learned over the years. And for me, like external stimuli like noise of traffic and even the people I see on the streets, like what mood they have and if they are stressed or if they are busy, it influences me whether I want to or not. Like those are ideas that that my mind gets populated with. So like I live right next to a lake right now, and it's not so many neighbors here. It's relatively quiet. And there's like forests that I can just go into that don't have like a house for the next, I don't know, 3-4 kilometers. So if I want, I can just go outside, cross the road, and walk into a forest, walk until my mind is quiet. And just having that opportunity to experience nature and getting like some time away from this world that always wants to be fast, for me is, I don't know, something happens to your mind when you are in nature.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like our body wants to tell us, hey, this is what you are made for. You're not made for the inside. You're not made for the inside four walls. You're made for the outside. And I don't know, something primal happens.
Mm.
And I don't, this feeling is very weird to describe, because it's not necessarily artistic inspiration necessarily, because I've seen this forest a million times.
Mm-hmm.
But the way certain things in nature, like moving leaves or waves that roll onto a beach, this repetitive sound and motion and stuff that you can just latch onto and let your mind relax without holding onto thoughts the entire time. If you experience that for an hour, and this can also happen during meditation, and then you come back to a problem that you've been working on, suddenly you have the solution. You might have thought about this for 12 hours, as hard as you possibly can, and you didn't find a solution. You go outside, you let your mind go at ease, and suddenly you have a solution. So yeah, like controlling your environment and having structures, having time for your mind and your body to be at ease makes them work so much better when they have to be in strain.
How much energy do you put into, if any, now? Obviously, one of the biggest ones was moving to a particular place, into your environment, whether that's from your desk or, like you said, taking time out to take walks or wherever else. Like, do you just let that happen organically, or do you strategize that?
I kind of strategize it. Like I found that I have certain things, like for example, routines for me are a big thing that I struggle to keep up, but I need them because otherwise things just go crazy. Like I will work until 5 in the morning if I don't have a solid evening routine. So I try to have like a solid morning routine and a solid evening routine. Those two things are like my cornerstones. And it's always like, get some movement, even if it's just 1 minute. Just get onto my yoga mat, like do 2-3 poses, sit down for, even if it's just 2 or 3 minutes of meditation.
Yeah.
Just do it, even if it's short. And it's always going to be longer than just the 2 minutes, but
of course, yes.
That's my cornerstone. And then, yeah, my environment is, I try to just make it nice. It gets chaotic, but I have these spurts of just needing to make it clean. And then I clean it up, I reorganize my living room, my office, and make things as relaxing as possible. And then I let myself be creative and chaotic again.
When did you realize, like, I guess the city environment or anything loud and bustling was something that your body didn't like, or at least your mind didn't like? The reason why I ask is because I didn't realize that until like I was close to 30, because I didn't realize up until that point I've always lived in like an urban, busy, bustling environment. I worked in one, like just constant chaos. And only when I went somewhere where it was just still, I realized, yo, this is my shit. Like this is what I like. And ever since then I've always chased it. Even if it's like for a week or a few days, that is enough, builds up enough in the tank to last me forever. Well, not forever, but like, until the next time I do it. But yeah, like, was that like something that you were always aware of? Because I'm curious, because I didn't realize it until I was out of it. But yeah, how did you know?
I don't know. Like I spent a lot of time outside as a kid. Like I was in the Boy Scouts and always going camping and stuff. But I totally forgot that. Right? I totally forgot how good it feels to be in nature while I was moving to Berlin and like living in the middle of the city and having all these noises around me and the entire time. And then, like I remember very specifically this moment where my girlfriend and I were looking at flats, and then we were looking like quite inside of Berlin, but those are all like expensive as hell. So we found this one flat that's a bit further outside. And we both were like, it's way too far outside. Like we have to take a train very long and it's going to be annoying. We're going to be far away from friends and stuff, but well, let's just look at it. In the worst case, we have a nice walk around the lake. And then we sat on this bench that's right next to the lake, and there's this little, like, not bay, but it's like a tiny, tiny bay. It's just like 2 meters wide, but the waves just kept pushing in and retreating. And I just kept looking at that, like the sun was shining, and I just kept looking at this water, and I noticed what happened to my mind only after like 20 minutes or so, where I was like, holy shit, I haven't had a thought in 20 minutes. My mind has just been empty.
Wow.
And then I realized that and was like, okay, like, can we please move here? I want this. I want this in front of my door. My stress levels went down so much afterwards.
Wow. And any regret since? Have you out a niche, both of you? Like, okay, let's go back, or is this like you guys are completely content with this setup?
No, like her more than me. Like I think I'm much more the person who's totally fine with being away from people for a long time and sitting behind my desk. Like my girlfriend is much more social than I am, so it's a bit more of a sacrifice for her than for me. But especially like since we got our dog, it's a very nice environment for him here. We're thinking about moving a bit further into the city, but wherever we go, I think like having some nature around us is gonna be very important for sure.
For sure, and I think it's important to at least know that that's got to be one of the requirements.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the times, that even for anything, like you realize sometimes when you're shopping around for something or looking for something, you're not aware of what you actually need. Sometimes then you just go through it and you look at the wrong criteria.
You know it when you see
it. Yeah, and then it's now like, okay, these are the hard points. Yeah. These are the must-haves. Everything else we'll figure out, kind of thing.
Yeah,
that's also like fascinating.
Yeah. I need a change of scenery sometimes. Like I'm kind of getting bored of this lake. It's very nice, but I need something new.
Again, I agree. Like I can relate to that in certain ways. Like I'm someone like yourself. Like I just need my tools, and that's it. I'll do my thing, and I'm content because I'm more obsessed about. Not more obsessed, but I've convinced my brain that that's your purpose. Just do that.
Yeah.
You do something okay, then that's it. Everything else, whatever. But yeah, if it was up to me, I'd have like a few spots and just shift around from maybe every 5 years and then do it around. But yeah,
I kind of want to go to like Sicily or something, like just live there for like half a year, because it's like I went to Cefalu in October, and I came back to Berlin and I felt like crying the entire time.
Oh no, this I was when I used to travel, it was always be the classic places, a beach and heat, and by accident, only because work sent us here. Long story, I ended up in the Alps, and I was like, I don't want to go to the cold, and I actually got ill from going there. But just seeing these gigantic mountains, just seeing how different the weather is there, the vibe and everything, and yeah, then I realized that, oh, okay, I gotta at least broaden my horizons in that regard. And yeah, I totally concur. Like the nature side, especially for a creative mind, whether you're not someone who wants to live in nature or anything anyway, like I definitely could not survive camping or anything like that more than probably 12 hours. But I don't mind doing it for 12 hours. It's a massive cheat code, I'd say. At least even if you just want any kind of excuse to explore it.
Yeah.
But speaking of like, I guess, codes or anything, or just art in general, like what kind of art do you like making? Like, what's your style? Has it evolved over time, or would you say you found back to grooves again? You found your groove of the kind of things you want to create? Because you mentioned a bit about world building. You mentioned a bit about keyframes, for example. What's your, I guess, calling card as a creator?
I don't know. I find it quite difficult to put like a label on what kind of art I do. Like so many people have like this thing, I'm an environment artist and that's all I'm gonna be. I don't know. I have things I'm good at. Like I've worked as an environment artist for 3.5 years. I know I can do that. I quite recently found out that maybe keyframes are like something I am quite good at as well. But other than that, for me, like, the thing I really like to create is mm, scenes that have something that clicks with me. And it's a super broad thing. But I found like often I gravitate towards like medieval-ish things, so not like
Mm-hmm.
super hardcore medieval, but a bit more low tech. I really like that greebly, like not quite refined tech. Like it's like copper pipes and
Mm.
not quite steampunk, but bit that direction. That's what I really, really like. Yeah, other than that, fantasy is something I often gravitate towards. So like this fantasy-ish worlds where things are a bit weird, but also like a bit recognizable. And yeah, historical stuff. Some like I'm a big nerd about history.
Mm. Any
um,
particular recent things, like any particular era in history, or just history in general?
History in general. Like there's so much to be drawn from what's already happened. And I don't know, like no matter where you look in human history, there's so much interesting stuff to find. And like making a project and learning about what I'm making is often more fun, or starting a
Mm-hmm.
project and learning all the backstory for what has happened in that culture is often so much more interesting to me than actually making the thing.
Yes.
Like learning about medieval history and how did castle sieges work? How
Mm.
did medieval archery work? How did siege engines work? Or how did Victorians make their light bulbs? I don't know. There's always so much interesting stuff to learn. It's what
Do
draws.
you do you have like a go-to resource, or do you just generally just figure it out, like you just know, yeah, whatever, like Google or whatever, or like, do you have like podcasts,
Hmm.
or like just figures that you think like, okay, these are the, yeah, they're gonna give me the answers, kind of thing?
Hmm. I have a lot of stuff. Like there's this podcast called Myths and Legends.
Mm-hmm.
Great podcast. He like tells old folk stories, but with a very modern, fun twist.
Right.
I used to listen to that a lot, but I have listened to all the episodes multiple times now. So, um, but yeah, I always found like interesting stories in that. Other than that, like YouTube videos from like channels about history.
Yeah.
Like Scholar Gladiatoria is like a fencing instructor guy. It's always like fun stuff. Then there's reenactors who do stuff. Folk tales. I can't even like put
Sure.
everything
No, fair
down,
enough.
but Pinterest as well. Sometimes I just go through Pinterest and look for interesting patterns or interesting palettes, interesting stuff that just looks interesting. I don't know. It's a constant brewing pot of things I look into.
History is just anything that's like anything historical, however it's like maybe 50 years ago to 5,000 years ago, whatever. It's it's so rich in terms
Mm,
of like creative inspiration that you can gain from it, but it's just like, even if you're not looking to create, about agitation, it agitates those kind of things in my brain where it's like, oh, that's just cool, or I
mm,
want to know more about it. And I just remember being at like probably 7, 8, 9 or whatever, like at school, it was a history hour or whatever, like that was a history day.
mm,
And I think it's Usborne or whatever, there's books, remember, like Egyptian or Greeks or whatever, and they're like,
mm,
you could peel it back and it shows the cutaways of how they used to live and all that kind of stuff. And I just remember always being fascinated by archaeology and things like
mm,
that as a kid. And again, yeah, like you just said, exploring that, seeing it, understanding. Firstly, I think it's, even today, we know how old things are, but I don't think we are able to fully grasp how old things
mm,
are. And things, at least in a technical sense, people figured out how to do. Like I'm not surprised, because the human brain is very powerful when you put your mind to it. Equally, when you don't put your mind to it, that knowledge can just fall off very quickly and you
mm,
can just almost forget about things. So, it's quite interesting in that sense. But yeah, I think my kids watch this really cool history show. It's called Horrible Histories. It's basically a funny take on funny stuff in history whilst teaching history.
Mm.
So it's a nice little balance. It's like, imagine if Will Ferrell did like a history show kind of thing. To the teach you, yeah, it's quite funny. A lot of poop jokes. But it's quite cool as well. But yeah, no, I think history is a very interesting subject in many ways, whether it's for creative stuff, just to know in general. And to be honest, that's the only information we have to feed off of for the future. You can't know about future stuff, but we base everything off historical things
You'd think
and
we
we build on
do
top
as
of it.
much art as there is about it, right?
Yes.
So much sci-fi stuff. I mean, sci-fi is also goddamn cool. Like most of the art books, like there's this big art book collection back there, and most of them are probably sci-fi books.
Yeah.
Actually, like the most books I have about like art is sci-fi, weirdly enough. But then all the how do you like info books are about like history and planes. I have tons of books about planes and flying machines and brains and
Yes.
mechanical stuff, architecture. Yeah.
Regarding your art style, like what do you hunt for technically?
Mhm.
Like what are the things that you really enjoy? Is it shapes, composition, lighting? Like what and even then, as a follow-up question, um, what is the aspect that you're really trying to nurture the most?
Hmm. At the moment, I would say composition. Like I keep coming back to that. Like two things that I like not like I constantly feel like there is so much more to learn about this. Is one like shape design and composition, and like shape design within objects, and like just finding the right balance of where to put details and how much is it's a never ending journey of knowing how little you know. And then you look
Yes.
at people who do that with such ease and such elegance, and yeah, it's a constant inspiration to get better at that. So yeah, I think like composition and like shape design are the
Mhm.
things that right now for me are like the biggest topic. And
Uh,
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, and like I think in past work, yeah, like the thing I chased for a long time was like good brushwork and like putting details where they need to be, leaving them out where they need to be, simplify where you can simplify, and like, finding the right detail density. It's always a journey.
And you mentioned like shapes and composition. Do you think there's ever an end to that?
No,
Like, do you think it's always going to be like a constant chase for it? And even then, do you think it can ever be conquered?
I think I think there is no. That's the thing that's so difficult about composition and shape design, right? Because there's no right way to do it. Like, yeah, there's all this like theory behind it, but like, what makes one composition better than another? You can always keep pushing shapes or moving your things around, and you can keep moving the camera, but there's nothing that says this is now better than this. Like, yeah, maybe like theoretically this one has like more interesting dynamics, but is dynamic even the right thing for this image? So like there is no right or wrong. That's the thing. There's just taste. And if you want to learn composition, then the only thing you can do to like really get better at it is like get better taste. And how do you get that? Like, yeah, you can look at better artists, you can keep looking at things, but not really practice taste. You have to wait until it gets better, and then you can practice composition, and then your composition will get better. But once it's caught up to your taste, then you can practice as much as you want. It will not really get better. So you cannot force it. You can just keep doing it and enjoy doing it, and try to make it more simple and down to the point.
And we've spoken about, I guess, a lot of the things that make you tick
Mm.
and how external influences, like your environment, for example, influence you. What about fellow creatives? What about people that inspired you as artists? Like, who are those?
Hmm. And I could list names until I fall off this chair as a skeleton. Um, I always struggle with coming up with things out of still air. So I'm gonna take a look at my board
Sure, 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 sure,
back
sure.
there. So like my favorite books I think that I have is like Electric State by Simon Stalenhag.
Yeah.
A fantastic book, absolutely amazing. Um, One of my favorite artists of all time. Like that guy is such a master of like subtlety and good
Yes.
composition and oh, great shape design. Absolutely fantastic. John Harris is like one of my biggest inspirations for like vibrant colors and
Hmm.
just fantastic. Nothing is stale. Nothing that he does is
Yes.
stale. It's always so dynamic and exciting. Well, what else do we have? I think those are like my two favorite books. Then oh yeah, Sid Mead. Um, that book has been sitting on my shelf forever. It's like also just simplicity of shape design is something I always. It's a book I always open up if I'm at a dead end of how to balance shapes and composition.
Yes.
Then in terms of architecture, like Frank Lloyd Wright is someone I always look back to. I have this huge ass tome of his architecture back there. So like just simplicity and balancing things out is something that he did fantastically. And other than that, yeah, like there's so many artists on social media that I admire until that I can look at until I'm blue in the face. Um, like I could name a million names, but I think those books are the things I always come back to. And yeah, like the like artists that live right now are like a constant source of inspiration. And
Mm.
this community that exists in the social media space and people you meet at events and it's like it feels like everybody knows each other, right? And everybody
True.
knows each
Yes. I
other's
agree.
work and
Yeah.
you often meet people and talk to them for half an hour at events and it's like, oh yeah, you that guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I fucking love your work. So yeah, like contemporary artists of our time are a constant inspiration.
Excuse me. I managed to make it nearly 2 hours that coffin. That's great. Um, what but we can I guess last topic before we wrap up. What does the future hold for you in terms of like things you want to work towards, things that excite you, and I guess things that maybe you think will change? Obviously, we were definitely in the period where maybe certain things are in flux. What the definition of maybe the industry is going to be, and etc. So yeah, I'd love to know like future stuff, what that holds for you, what you'd like it to hold, and what you expect it to be, which is a foolish question because we're never going to know.
Mm,
But equally, we can always speculate.
okay. Well, so like I this year, like my main goal is to like do more freelance work, to like work on more of a variety of projects, because like there's so much to learn just from working on different projects. Like I've worked the same job for 3 years now. Um, like I keep working there like half the time, just to have like a bit of stability because I think freelance is for me always like the anxiety of not having work for a couple of months always kind of like made that not super desirable for me. But now I've found the solution where like half the time I do this and half the time freelance. So yeah, like work on more different projects and long term my goal has always been like making art. So I want to like develop some of the projects that are big that I haven't shown yet. And like in some time in the near future or far future, I really would like to make an art. Because I think those are like the things that like I think no one's gonna ever make an art book about AI art, or maybe they will, but I hope no one buys that. But art books have been always like the thing that I cherish the most. I like collecting them. I like looking at them. And yeah, I would like to make one.
Now, I think I agree. Like looking at my library and think about when you just mentioned yours, it's shifted a lot since I used to be. It's more like I'd say 80% just more reference material
Mm,
and non-fiction factual stuff, and then the rest is like art books or whatever. But there is something I find prestigious about that, like just the art book from an artist,
mm,
them collating it, putting the work into it.
yeah.
Like the one book that really, well, it definitely just convinced me that I should pursue concept art was Daniel Simon's Cosmic Motors.
Mm,
I've still got that book, and that's how powerful an art book can be. Like it
mm,
made me change trajectory of my career, and it made me pursue something that I didn't think was possible to pursue, just from a book.
mm.
And it'd be grateful to speak to him one day and just let him know that. But I don't think when he's making it, that was ever his intention to like, hey, I'm going to convince someone to change their career or whatever else. He just as an output
Mm,
did it, published it, whatever else. Yeah, powerful stuff. And I guess like it's a great way to connect to another creative as well because it's
mm.
distilled, it's packaged, it's nicely presented as well. Um, is that something you're working on right now, or is that something that's
No,
just still like it's there in the ether and it will manifest when it
far
manifests?
from it. It's far in the ether, and I think like I need to, or like I'm waiting for an idea that is worth putting into an art book, or like an idea that I want to like put things into for long enough that there is enough material for an art book. I think I
Mm,
wouldn't necessarily like just make a project and then decide, oh, this is going to be an art book and keep firing into it and make it for the sake of being an art book. But I would probably wait until I just have a body of work that can just be restructured in a way. For example, like Alex Konstad did this
amazing. Yeah.
Obscura, which I didn't buy when it was on Kickstarter, and you could purchase it nowhere, and I'm trying to find it. But I think that went similar. Like he just painted stuff for a long time, and then found that some of these work well as a world, and then restructured it a bit. And yeah, I think I would do that in like maybe 5 or 10 years when I have enough work. Um, yeah, there's no rush.
Mhm. And I guess final topic, maybe it's a negative one. I guess it depends on your opinion. You mentioned a little bit AI,
Hmm?
and what is your, I guess, relationship with it? Because it's definitely something that's just going to hang around now. It's definitely something that's going to be implemented. And forget art in general. It's
Hmm.
pretty much like in getting infused with so many different aspects of our life now. Whether it's like customer service places or anything you read online is had AI has touched
Hmm.
it in some particular way, good or bad. That's definitely down to the viewer's opinion. How is it affecting your approach to art in any way, and what is your take on it?
Hmm. So, like honestly, I have no desire to engage with it in any way. Very honestly, like I've in the beginning of Midjourney, like I've tried making some prompts and generating images from it. I felt absolutely no joy in that process. It was
Mm,
like there's so many decisions to make anyway. Like how am I going to decide which of these images is
right.
better than the other? Like no, like I like painting stuff and I like making 3D stuff, and I will keep doing it that way. So for me, like creatively, it doesn't really change anything. Of course, it changes like the industry and how art is perceived in general, and I find that very disheartening how much it's devaluing how art is perceived. I feel like human-made art is becoming a bit like jazz music for musicians. Like they can appreciate how hard it is to make it, but most people cannot really, like it's not that popular as pop music, which is just I don't know. It's not for me. But yeah, same way with art. So I think art is going to be more appreciated by other artists. Um, but I can't really change anything about that. So I try to not like let it affect how I feel about art, and I'm definitely not gonna keep chasing the newest like way to do things always just to do it the way everyone else does or do it as fast as everyone else does. I will keep doing what I'm doing, and if it's gonna be enough, then if it's gonna be enough. And if not, then I think if AI is gonna be at a point where I have to really worry about if I can eat tomorrow, then the world will be entirely in a spot where that's gonna be the least of my worries, right? If I can work the job that I want to work. So I would see where it goes. I would just keep doing what I'm doing.
Awesome. Niklas, it's been absolutely amazing speaking with you. Thanks so much
Likewise,
for jumping on.
really enjoyed this conversation.
A big thanks to Niklas for being incredibly open and honest about everything in this episode. Hit the links to check out his work and see what he is up to. Remember to seek advice from a qualified professional if anything in this episode relates to your experiences with mental health. And finally, head on over to learnsquared.com and take courses like Niklas did to take the next step in your artistry. I've been your host, Aaron Danda. Till next time.